Welcome, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Kitt Shapiro. She's an entrepreneur, a lifestyle influencer, and she also just happens to be the daughter of legendary and one of the most famous women in the world, Eartha Kitt. She joins us this morning to talk about her book entitled Eartha and Kitt, A Daughter's Love Story in Black and White. Kitt, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
It's great to have you. And I was telling you before we started that the book is an incredible love story of yours and your mother's. Why'd you decide to share it at this point in your life?
Well, I think something happens as we get older. I mean, I'm going to be 60 years old this year. And I think that you come into your own, especially as women. I think the older we get, the more comfortable we get in our own skin. And I felt that there's so much noise out there right now. And this message of this, I call it a love story because this connection between these two people who happen to be mother and daughter is so interesting and intense and unique to a point. I think many people will be able to relate to it. But the lessons that she imparted and how I was brought up, I think is so relevant still to this day, even more relevant probably now, with so many of those lessons, that I really felt hearing that part of who she was an important way to keep conversations going. And that was something my mother really enjoyed, really deep, intense, intellectual conversations. And when I titled it A Love Story in Black and White, because obviously when you look at my mother and you look at me, you see the difference in skin color. And today, with what we're experiencing in our society it's amazing to me that there are people who talk to me through social media, usually, because they wouldn't say it to my face, and who will say to me, you could not possibly be her biological daughter. She obviously lied to you. You're clearly adopted. There's just no way. And I find that so fascinating because, first of all, I am her biological daughter, and I do look like my mother, but unfortunately, people don't want to see past skin tone. They refuse to look at it. And because of that, all they see is blonde hair, light skin, light eyes, and they're like, well, you can't be her daughter. And genetics are fascinating science, and there's nothing I can do. And so I really felt the timing was really right to start to talk about this, to keep, we are talking about it. I think the more voices that are out there, the more we can't avoid, these discussions.
Is it frustrating for you, Kitt, that in your almost 60 years, you're still having to defend whether or not you're your mother's biological daughter, and parallel that to your mother having to defend her race almost her whole life?
Yes. It's so sad that I have to actually make a statement that says, yes, I am her biological daughter. And then people will then say, well, then why aren't there any pictures of her pregnant? And why aren't, and it's like, really, first of all, in 1960, celebrities didn't go around showing their bellies like they do today. And, when people say to me that, you're clearly adopted, well, let's be real. I mean, and when could a Black woman have adopted a white baby in 1961? I mean, come on. That's ridiculous. So yeah, and then my mother faced like you just said, my mother faced these issues, the opposite side of them, but from both sides of the race card. She had, as a little girl, she was referred to as a yellow gal because she wasn't dark enough from where she was, lived in the South when she was born in this little town in South Carolina in 1927. And obviously then as she got older, she was a Black woman. So she was constantly feeling, why the need to pigeonhole people? Why the need to separate us by the color of our skin when we have no control over that part of our lives?
As I was reading the book, Kitt, and when it comes to your birth and your parents, it's almost like they are relieved by your skin color because the battle that she had to fight from a very little girl all the way up until she was a full-grown woman, legendary around the world, it felt like she was saying, you won't have to fight this battle?
Well, I mean, I think the reality, I mean, look, you look at me, right, and I don't have to fight the battle, and I can't really put myself in her shoes or anybody else's shoes, and I'm not trying to. I can't help the way that I was born. I was also happened to be born to a woman who, by the time I came along, was already very famous. And celebrity brings a lot of lack of obstacles or lesser obstacles, certainly for me. But that being said, I think one thing my mother really liked about giving birth to what she described as a mutt, she would say to me, you either fill every quota or you break every rule. And she liked that you couldn't really pinpoint my ethnic background. She liked that I had all this mixed upness inside of me. My father is as lily white, or was, he's too has passed, as lily white as they get. He's Irish and German from, Evanston, Illinois. He doesn't get whiter than that in so many ways. And my mother was also mixed. Cherokee Indian, African American, and probably her father was white, although the identity of her biological father was never known to her, or certainly neither one of us ever knew it. Mm-hmm. So she really thought that was one less thing that I would have to deal with in life, right? Because there'd be one less category. You couldn't put me just in one category. I filled numerous ones, and she liked that. She thought humans were so unique as it was, that we should embrace our uniqueness. We should embrace these qualities of how intermixed we all are. And so both my parents, they told me my whole life, what all of my ethnic backgrounds were. And when I did my DNA recently, I found out it's exactly what they told me.
Wow. And so one of the things that you write about, and I was saying to you earlier before we started, is that I don't think a lot of people really realized what an incredible hard journey that your mother had growing up in South Carolina and not being wanted by her family because she wasn't dark enough.
Yeah.
Did she talk about that growing up, or was that something that she just sort of pushed aside and
Oh, no, she talked about it a lot. She was very open about it. I think it molded her to make the person that she was, and she embraced it because of that. But she also struggled with that because of the incredible amount of pain that she endured as, in those formative years, to have experienced the kind of rejection mm-hmm. and abuse mm-hmm. that she did. Her mother had to give her away because she went to marry a black man, who said, I won't have that yellow gal living in my house. And it wouldn't allow my mother to come with them. And my mother struggled with trying to, make sense of how a mother could do that. She understood on one level intellectually, but then obviously, that was very hurtful and devastating. And I think that she really held on. And so she talked about it a lot because it was really important for her to remember her roots, to remember the journey and the struggle and the abuse, because it built that strength, that incredible strength, inner strength that she had.
And it sounds like, as you're reading the book, it sounds like the abandonment that she received from her mother and the man that her mother would ultimately marry. She was a very young girl at the time, but her mother went on to die young as well. Yeah. So there's no real resolve that she has there with her mother.
No, there was no resolve with that. And also then, not knowing who her biological father was. And we tried, we did search for the birth certificate. We did see a copy of the birth certificate, but by the time we had been able to obtain a copy, the name had been redacted, which the judge had said she didn't believe that the name was even available, right? They probably had been redacted, back in the 1930s to protect the father, which most likely a white man. And it was probably due to the fact that, my grandmother, my mother's mother, was probably raped, and that the pregnancy was a result of that. So I look back and I think how we identify ourselves so much by knowing who, our names and our parents and the town that we grew up in, and how we become who we are. And to not have that information your entire life, or be missing that piece, has to feel, really a little unsettling. And I think that she struggled, with that. I think on some level she came to terms with it, but in other ways she really, didn't.
Mm-hmm. Let me get a break here, Kitt, but when we come back, I want to talk about your mom leaving the South and going to New York and beginning to find possibility. Our guest this morning is Kitt Shapiro. She is the daughter of legendary Eartha Kitt, and the book is entitled Eartha and Kitt, A Daughter's Love Story in Black and White. Stay on point. We're back with more right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is amazingly talented, beautiful. She's an entrepreneur, and her mother was somebody that we all know from Catwoman and all of the amazing things that she did throughout her life and her body of work. Eartha Kitt. The book is entitled Eartha and Kitt, A Daughter's Love Story in Black and White. And so when you come to your mom's story, she is really abandoned and abused. And
Yes.
so there is a relative, maybe an aunt, I think, in New York that she gets word of this and she sends for your mother. And tell the story of what happens when she gets to New York.
So, as you mentioned, my mother was abused, physically, sexually, emotionally abused in the South by the family that she was given to when her mother had to give her up. And as I've been told there was one woman I met recently in the South who was with my mother. She was 90 plus years old and remembers playing with my mother as a little girl. And the first thing she said to me when she came up to me was, she said, they treated her so horribly. And so this aunt had been sent word that if you don't get this child out of here, they're going to kill her. I mean, they really were abusive. She sends for her to come to New York, and my mother arrives in New York with every possession she had, literally wearing everything on her body from the train. She'd never seen indoor plumbing. She'd never seen, trains, elevated trains before. The aunt lived in Spanish Harlem, where my mother learned to speak Spanish fluently, which she did her entire life. And, she flourished to a point. The aunt was not a warm and fuzzy, cuddly, motherly type. She felt, I think, out of obligation, as my mother would say, that she took this child in. My mother later wondered if the aunt actually wasn't her biological mother. My mother questioned that as she got older.
Why did she question that?
Because the aunt had a lighter skin tone and had she had more Cherokee features like my mother did. Then my mother remembers the woman in the South who said, who she thought was her mother. Mm-hmm. I'm not really sure, if that was just maybe wishful thinking on my mother's part, that, she kind of felt as she got older that maybe this woman rescued her because she felt that was, she really was her mother and it wasn't important. That's what you do for a child, you come to their aid. Or if it was based in some form of reality that, information that she had gotten. I'm not really sure how it came about. But New York was not easy for my mother. She was very shy, and the aunt was very strict and somewhat abusive, not to the extent that she had in the South, but she was a very strict, and she would hit her, which was not uncommon in many families, obviously. But my mother, soaked up her environment. She would tell me, I would listen to the sounds of the city. I would listen to the sounds of music playing. I would watch movement as how people go through their days. I saw that if you spoke a certain way and you behaved, you held yourself a certain way, that you were treated differently. And I think that's where she started to understand that education and knowledge, whether it doesn't have to necessarily be in a school, because she didn't finish high school, but she knew the importance of self-knowledge and reading and learning. And even if you maybe couldn't read, you could still learn by watching and observing. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, how the start of her really lifting herself up, where she went to the School of Performing Arts. And then she was dared to go on an audition for the Katherine Dunham Ballet Troupe, which was a Black African ballet troupe at the time. And my mother had not taken dance in any formal fashion at all. She just watched and saw what was around her. And she took the dare and went and auditioned and got a full scholarship to the school, and then subsequently joined the dance troupe, which is how she ended up traveling the world. My mother was really good at knowing when a door opens, you keep moving forward, right? The one way to survive is just put one foot in front of the other, and just don't give up. And that's one thing I give her a lot of credit for.
And her circumstances at times were so dire. I wondered where that intestinal fortitude came from, because there was nobody other than that teacher that you write about in the book that really saw that there's potential here. You know, the aunt never encouraged her talent. Did she ever say, you know, where that drive to be somebody came from? Because to everybody, she was really nobody.
Right. I think the drive, I think on some level she was born with that drive. I think there's some part of us as humans that are just genetically made up to be survivors. And I think a lot of that came from being in the South. She was, you know, when you're so mistreated, she would hide. And because she was tiny, she was tiny her entire life. But as a little girl, she said, I would hide and I would watch and I would listen and I would pay attention to not only human beings, but to nature, to animals. You know, she watched interactions. She watched how animals interacted with each other, how evolution, you know, would happen with nature. And I do believe that her Eartha being her given name, she truly was connected to the universe and to our environment on a level that was surreal. And she understood that. So I think that even in New York, when you're around buildings but you still got that human being, her aunt didn't, you know, support her or encourage her. But like you said, she mentions this one particular teacher, and I think there were two teachers in general in her life. She spoke about her entire life. These teachers saw something, and even though they may not have really been able to, you know, push her forward academically, they gave her enough support emotionally. One put her hand on my mother's shoulder one day and said, "You have the hand of God on your shoulder." And that stayed with my mother her entire life. So this power that adults have, negatively and positively, to affect, you know, these little children in their formative years is so incredible. And my mother never forgot that. And I think that really formed who she was as a human being.
And then she keeps pressing forward into her career, and she starts to be noticed. But then she has so much moxie, and you can just feel it in the book with the moves that she was able to make and to chart her own path, that she does just that when she's in France, in Paris. Talk a little bit about that.
So she had gone to France, gone to Paris with the ballet company, and she had an opportunity on her day off to perform. She was given an opportunity at this club to perform as a soloist and to sing. And again, a door opened, and my mother said, you know, I don't really know what to do, but someone's offering me, I'm going to take it. So she went to Miss Dunham and she told her what she had been offered. And Miss Dunham said, no, you can't do it. You know, it's not allowed. And my mother didn't understand, why wouldn't it be allowed? I'm not doing anything on your time. I'm doing it on my own time. And I'm not taking away from the dance troupe. So Miss Dunham said to my mother, if you do it, you're done. That's it. I dare you. You go ahead. You try to be, you know, on your own. And so my mother took the dare, and she left the company in Paris on her own, without an act, without being a singer, without really knowing what she was going to do. But, you know, my mother would tell me all her life, as she observed people, she learned from them, and she would watch. And the dance company, she said, I would learn other people's parts. I would learn everyone's role, how the singers and the dancers, even the seamstresses. I learned how to sew. So she was always prepared to do whatever needed to be done. And I think that showed she was very deliberate, you know, doors open, which may have been, you know, happenstance, but she was very deliberate in that she's like, I know I can do this. If I'm going to rely on myself, I have the tools. And if I don't have the tools, I'll figure it out and I'll learn the tools.
I love it. And I love that you wrote that she said she figured out everybody's job. So when that door opens, she's prepared for opportunity. Let's take a break here, but when we come back, I want to talk about when she will ultimately marry and you come along and how that changes her life. Kitt Shapiro is our guest this morning. Stay on point, everybody. We're back with more right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Kitt Shapiro is our guest this morning. She's the daughter of legendary Eartha Kitt, and she's sharing hers and her mother's story. And so what I thought in the book, Kitt, was once she had really become famous, she started to attract very powerful white men. Mm-hmm. And in those relationships, there were rejections. And I started thinking, wow, her whole life, there was always some reason why she was rejected, and largely because of her skin color.
Yes.
How did she process that? What had to be, now we know it as trauma, right? Then it was just maybe abandonment and rejection. How was she processing the trauma?
I mean, I think that she felt it. She was open about feeling it. And, there were many moments in her life where you could see how she would react to somebody was that, she was afraid of being rejected. I mean, it became a pattern, a narrative that she carried with her. And I do think we tend to repeat our narratives, over and over again. I think that I think there was a part of her that felt that that was a necessary pain. I think that she felt that pain fueled her. So on some level, I think, this is me talking, that she held on to it because it served her, also. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So but I also think that's a struggle. I mean, none of us really want to feel pain. Sure. We don't want to be comfortable, but yet somehow we do continue to go down that path. Mm-hmm. So yes, there were many men she was rejected because in some cases their families would not have allowed them to marry my mother because of her skin color. And in other cases, they were famous enough that the public wouldn't have allowed it. So she was, always sort of ended up back alone.
Mm-hmm. And then she meets your dad, though. But that relationship, and you write about, keeping their letters, the letters that they had written to each other and the affection, that they had for each other. Talk about that sort of relationship.
She was introduced to this man who, as I said, my father was from Evanston, Illinois. He wasn't in show business. He had nothing to do with the entertainment industry. He was just a regular guy. He was an accountant that had a mutual friend and introduced them. And I think, my mother thought that would have been a better fit, right? That's a better fit to be somebody who's just a regular guy, not going to have to deal with his family, that piece, the public, that piece. And she had hoped it would end up being a partnership, that they would be a team working together. But she was famous and she was the breadwinner and she was a very strong woman. And that's not easy in a relationship. And she wasn't willing to compromise when she got to that age. She wasn't willing to compromise or to even, acquiesce from a relationship perspective. There's a very famous clip that's on the internet. People can find it, that Beyonce has sampled, as well as Miley Cyrus and many others, that talk about my mother's. Someone asks her about compromise, and she says, a man comes into my life and I have to compromise. For what? For what? I had an issue with that clip. I have an issue with it because I think in relationships, you do have to give and take, right? So maybe it's not compromising per se, but I do think that there's more to it. But from my mother's perspective, she had already compromised so much in her life. She'd given up too much, and she wasn't going to give up again. And she was going to stand her ground. And if you didn't accept her exactly as she delivered that, then forget it. In a relationship. Mm-hmm. So that didn't work with my parents. My father maybe wasn't strong enough. I don't know. He had his own issues. He had a mother who was also incredibly strong, who ended up being very close with my mother. My grandmother and my mother were very, very close. And so subsequently, I was very close with his family and always had been, even after my parents divorced. But it was unfortunate that their relationship didn't work. But I find it interesting, as you mentioned, I talk about in the book, that she kept these letters between the two of them that are really fascinating. And it shows this affection, this love between them. Maybe him more, towards her more, but she definitely, because as I got older, she would not talk about him in an affectionate way. But when you look at the letters, there's definitely a love between them. That when I was born, I became the center of her world. I really was. She would give anything to be with me, and she would have given up anything for me. And so I think that really became her focus, and working on a relationship was not going to be something that she, was able to keep as the main piece of her, importance in her life.
I wondered, Kitt, where did you find those letters? Did you just happen upon them, or did you know that she had things like that? Because those were letters from, the 1960s, the early 1960s, it seems like.
Yeah, my mother kept everything. She'd probably be considered a hoarder. So I have hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of paper that she's written on.
Wow.
And when she died in 2008, I'm an only child. You start to go through her belongings, and you start to wonder. First of all, you wonder things like, why did she keep them? I mean, there's this random napkin that she kept. I don't even know where it's from or why, and she wrote on it. And I'm like, I was afraid to throw it out. But these letters, along with many, many other forms of correspondence, she kept, and some very positive, some very negative pieces of correspondence. But I think my mother was able to look at life in a big picture, as that you have to be able to take both sides of the coin and use that to your benefit. And she would say, I've taken all the manure that's been thrown on me in my life and used it as fertilizer.
Wow.
And I really think that that's how she made it through, and she truly believed that.
Did you find some solace in reading, those letters that your parents had written to each other? Because there was a lot of love, it sounded like, in those letters at a point.
Yes, I think that as a child, this product of this union, you want to know that they had at some point they liked each other, and yeah. So I mean, there is that connection. But I also realized that she kept them. So even though she changed her tone when you would talk to her later in her life about my father, there's she still kept those letters. So obviously she was aware that was a really important and very intense and caring relationship at one point.
Absolutely. Let's take a break here, but when we come back, I want to talk about the love that your mother showered you with, and how she just believed that God had given her the perfect child that somehow completed her life. Kitt Shapiro is our guest this morning, and we're talking about her and her mother's love story, their relationship of growing and loving each other. Stay on point. We're back after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. What an incredibly fascinating conversation. And Kitt, we want to thank you for sharing, more of your mother's life and your journey with your mom together. It's one that, if it wouldn't be real, it would read like fiction. It's just so incredible. And so you're born, and she really starts to, you can feel in the book that she finally has a blood relative that belongs to her, that is connected to her. And she starts really building her life around you. Talk about when you come to understand how big she is and how much she's lost, and how you have filled almost a missing in her life.
Yeah, I think I understood very early on, obviously on a subconscious level, that I had a real purpose of not just being on this planet, but there was a connection between us that was very, very unique. And as a little girl, I remember saying to her, God picked me to be your daughter. I was intentionally picked. We were a really good fit. I worked really well being, her Kitt Kitt to her Eartha. And she would even introduce us as we walk into events, and she would say, "I'm Eartha and this is Kitt," as if I completed her somehow. And I think in some ways I did. I think I gave her these roots, this foundation, this stability that she had always yearned for. And she didn't have even in her marriage. But here it was, she gave birth to this stability. And it worked really well for us. Although, and the book is a love story, but it's not without, I mean, I was a typical teenage girl. It was a very mother-daughter relationship. There were many times, when I would roll my eyes like teenagers do, and I would be miserable, and I would hope that as we're driving down the street that, the car door would just open and she'd roll out and, put me out of my misery. I mean, she was a very strict mother. She was a stickler for manners, for, proper behavior. Obviously, that part of that was the times that, I was born in. But, I mean, to be that intensely loved by a parent is not so easy at times. It is easy and it's wonderful and the blessings are incredible. And my mother would say, you can never love a child too much. And I truly believe that. Wow. But as, at times in my life when I would want to hang out with my friends and, be independent on my own and do my own thing. And, I could tell my mother struggled with that rejection that she'd always felt. Those emotions came up a lot when I would sort of, speak out to go do something on my own. When I got married, I mean, there were moments in my life where, it was hard for her. So, we had our difficulties and our moments. But I do think when people say love conquers all, when you know you are cared for on that deep a level, when somebody loves you so much, you are able to just hopefully I was, and I'm blessed to be able to say this, to know that and to appreciate that. And we had that during our lives together. It wasn't after she died that I came to terms with all this. We knew how we felt about each other during our lives together. And that is a true blessing.
And so you can feel the love, but I wonder in the book if the intensity of the love that she has, because you're all that she has and she's all that you have. And so now I'm wondering, as I'm reading the book, are you put into a role that you almost have to be everything for your mother? And especially as a young girl, becoming a teenager, is that too much? Because now there's no pulling back because she always wants you there. But you really have to get up and live your own life too. And I wonder if that was a lot.
It was a lot. It was a lot. And there were many times when I yearned for my parents to even be married to each other, even if they didn't like each other, because I knew there was supposed to be a buffer. It wasn't all supposed to be me as a parent, from a child, parent, child. There was supposed to be somebody that she could go to, she could slam the door and say, that child is making me crazy. Or I wanted a sibling that I could go to and say, slam the door and say, mom's making me crazy. Neither one of us had that. So yeah, there were many times when it was tough. But that being said, there was no other choice, right? I mean, it was what it was. And we sort of, we went through the hills and the valleys, and we came out the other side. I talk about, when I got married, and my mother walked me down the aisle, and if you see the photograph, she looks like she were walking the plank. I mean, the woman is she looks like she's about to give me away to I don't even know, some cult or something. I mean, it's crazy. And what's really crazy is that she was really happy for me because, she's processing this intellectually. She's going, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, right? My daughter's supposed to be getting married and having a relationship and having her own family. So she struggled with that. So it's what we do, right? We ebb and flow.
Sure. And so with telling this incredible story and looking back on your life, because now as you write the book, you're looking back from the very beginning until the end of your mother's life in 2008. And I wondered if it was a catharsis for you, going back and looking at this life that was so filled. I mean, your mother literally traveled with you, and you had experiences that most, not just young people, but most people will never have had in a lifetime. When you look back on all of that, what do you think?
Oh, I think how incredibly blessed I was and continue to be, because this woman, for whatever reason or whatever made her who she was such an incredible person, but her parenting was so unique, and her ability to parent on instinct. She functioned in life instinctively, but she parented instinctively, and she understood. I talk to people about how I grew up in Beverly Hills, California, very privileged, but yet my mother understood that it was really important that I learn that Beverly Hills, California is not reality, right? I mean, this is not reality in any form or fashion. So when we would travel, and as you said, my mother took me and traveled everywhere with me when she worked around the world. Luckily, she was, very well known worldwide. She made sure that it wasn't these, the nice hotels and the sightseeing stuff that we saw. My mother would talk to people who lived in these neighborhoods, and hotel staff and taxi drivers, and she would make sure, she would say, where do you shop? What do you eat? What do you do? And she would want to really learn, because she felt that learning how other people, other societies, other beliefs, other religions, other ethnic groups, how they function, was how you really started to understand each other. And when you can listen to somebody else and see what they do and who they really are, the empathy that we have for each other, the ability to understand that we're all here on this tiny little planet, and every single one of us has a right to be here. And to really respect that, I think, is the incredible gift that she was able to impart in me, that I know as a parent was not an easy thing to come to. She didn't learn it from anybody. She came to it all on her own. And the blessing that has given me to the richness of my life because of those teachings are just incredible.
Kitt, it is an incredibly beautiful story, and I want to thank you for sharing it with the world. Before you've got to go, the book is entitled Eartha and Kitt, A Daughter's Love Story in Black and White. Again, just an incredible, incredible story. Tell people about all of the things that you have going on and how they can connect.
Well, you can connect with me, Kitt Shapiro, on all different platforms. On Facebook, it's Kitt Shapiro page. On Instagram, it's at Kitt Shapiro. I also have a company of accessories that say something called Simply Eartha, which uses my mother's handwritten notes and her Kittisms, phrases that she would coin, that I use to share who she was and her wisdom, and to keep conversations going between us. And we all have a legacy, whether you come from someone who's known around the world or in your own neighborhood or just to you. We all have a legacy, and history is something we need to remember, our family history, and to talk about and to share with each other, and to understand that we are all here and all unique, and to embrace each other because of that.
Indeed. Again, Eartha and Kitt, A Daughter's Love Story in Black and White. Kitt, thank you so much. What an incredible conversation.
Thank you.
Indeed. Hey, everybody, stay on point. We're back right after this.